Welcome to the Hockey Podcast. I am Luke Lipinski.
And I am Doug Cannon.
On this week's show, we take a look at which of this year's Cup finalists has the better shot at a return trip in 2015, and then we try to figure out where exactly Jason Spezza actually wants to play hockey.
And well, you know, folks, there are no more games being played, with the Stanley Cup being awarded to the Los Angeles Kings, the Calder Cup being awarded to the Texas Stars, but there is plenty of hockey news with the NHL awards and the NHL draft just around the corner.
All that and so much more. Let's drop the puck on episode 44. Well, Doug, here we are. The Stanley Cup is officially in the books. The LA Kings are
how you feeling?
champions. I feel sad.
I feel very sad.
Hockey season is over. Although the preseason schedules were released, we're about 3 months away from hockey season starting up again.
Yeah, but we have no games to watch.
We have no games, and all of your Memorial Cup games that you DVR'd for the summer are
got
deleted.
erased. So that was a very depressing. I turned on my list and I went, oh.
Now it's nothing other than the Real Housewives of Atlanta for you, correct?
No, I actually watched The Real Husbands of Hollywood.
Oh, that's a different show.
Okay.
All right, then. So this is episode number 44, and that, of course, means it is time for the game that we don't have a name for. I mean, you'd think 44 episodes in, we would have a name for this game.
No, the number game. I like just the number game.
That's about as creative as the Hockey Podcast.
Well, then we're very apropos amongst ourselves.
All right, we'll call this the number game on the Hockey Podcast. Number 44, who do you have, Doug?
I have a bunch. I have a lot.
All right.
For 44.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with my top four.
Okay.
No, seriously. I'm going to go with my top four, and then I will pick one. Okay, so my top four.
Bracket style?
Yeah.
So do I even get to name any?
Yeah. My top four, I'm going to start with my defenseman, of course.
What? I didn't even know you knew forwards existed.
Dave Babbage.
Ooh.
Good, huh?
Yeah,
that's a good one.
That is a good one.
Brooks Orpik.
It's a good one,
Another good one. And then my forwards are Rob Niedermeyer.
All right.
And Stefan Richer.
However, you left out the correct answer.
Okay, and the correct answer is?
Chris Pronger.
No.
No?
No.
That's not an argument. That's just you shooting me down. I looked at all those guys, too, and I don't know who I would have gone with before I realized
My
Pronger.
number one pick is Babbage.
Okay. I'll give you that, but I'm still going to take Pronger.
That's a good pick.
Philadelphia, I believe, is still paying him, so apparently they agree with me.
I'll be honest with you. I was very, very sad to see him leave the game.
Yeah, the way he had to leave.
He's such an impact player. It was kind of nobody wants to leave the game like that.
Yeah, it just kind of gets slowly phased out. A side note, how many players that aren't on Philadelphia is Philadelphia currently paying?
Well, we know of two off the top of our head.
Yeah, at least Ilya Brizgalov and Chris Pronger. That's a pretty decent.
I was going through some old files the other day, and I found a picture of Briz, a very young Briz, in a Mighty Ducks jersey.
Wow.
That's going back.
It's not the one where he's wearing the tie-dye shirt standing next to the cup, is
it?
Because
no.
that haunts
It's
my
just
dreams.
his headshot in the Mighty Ducks, the purple-green jersey that they wore.
That was, what, like 9 teams ago for him now?
Yes.
Okay.
If not more.
So the LA Kings win the Stanley Cup. They defeat the Rangers 4-1. I don't know, Doug. What did you think of the series? Because my thought is always, if you get to a round of the playoffs and you get swept, it's almost like you weren't even there.
My mindset going into the Stanley Cup is it should go 7.
Okay.
No, just stay with me.
That just means more hockey.
It should go that too, but it should go 7 because you get the 2 best teams out of 30, and it should just back and forth, battle, and it should come down to that last game and crown the winner.
Okay.
And I thought with the 2 teams that were there, that was going to happen. So I was a little disappointed that it didn't happen.
I did not think it would go 7, although your point that you have 2 teams that are used to going 7 games in every series.
This year especially.
Is well taken. Yeah, but so L.A. wins their opening series, wins Game 7 on the road against San Jose. They win Game 7 on the road against Anaheim. They win Game 7 on the road against Chicago. I thought they'd beat New York in 6. I mean, that was our pick.
We picked 6, yeah.
And my only reasoning for that was that I thought Lundqvist would steal 2 games. He played well.
He came close to stealing 2 games.
He did. And probably, I still think the Rangers deserve to win Game 2, but I ultimately I don't think it would have mattered because LA was the far superior team, as they showed. But they did have to get 3 of their 4 wins in overtime and double overtime.
Correct.
Including Game 5 to put the series away on home ice. LA is just better in every area. I mean, they really just are. I don't think New York was the second best team in the NHL this year.
Well, it was funny because in Game 5, I watched the first overtime period, and I'm going, hey, New York has a chance to win this. This might go back, and we'll have a Game 6. And then when LA came out in the second overtime, I went, uh-oh. They just never seemed to be tired. They never seemed to lose their legs. They just kept coming. The only time I ever saw them tired was when Drew Doughty tried to lift the cup over his head. After playing 50 minutes of hockey, you could tell he was tired.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, LA just kept coming. And it was like when the Rangers finally did get the puck in the offensive zone, it was only there for a blink of an eye.
I think a lot of that, too, was the simple fact that LA has been there before and they've had success before, and you can't help but compare and contrast this year's run to the 2012 run. And I said this on a previous show that I really thought, I'm not saying LA didn't deserve to win in 2012, but I thought a lot of things broke their way. I thought they got bounces, they got calls, they got just a phenomenal performance from Jonathan Quick, one of the best I've ever seen in the playoffs. And again, I'm not saying they didn't deserve to win. They also got a kind of a nice break in the bracket where it was New Jersey coming out of the East when there were strong teams in the East that year that, and again, not taking away from what they did. This year, I think they were overwhelmingly the best.
Well, it's funny because at the start of the season, we were pretty harsh on New York. I mean, they weren't doing a lot of things right.
We did say, though, give them time because they were breaking in a new coach.
They were breaking in a coach, yes, and they turned things around and they got themselves in the playoffs. But I still saw in the playoffs with New York little things that I saw during the regular season that prevented them from winning certain games. Power play is one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, the Rangers had so many opportunities because LA plays a very hard, very fast, very physical game, and penalties will come from that. Whether they're warranted or not warranted, I'm not going to argue that. But a team like LA that plays as hard as they play, they're going to draw a few PIMs, okay? You got to cash in on that.
Yeah, when you're playing a team that doesn't make a lot of mistakes, you have to cash in, and I would even go one step further. If you're LA and you know what it takes to win and you're committing a penalty here or there and the other team isn't making you pay for it, you can take more liberties.
Exactly.
And they know that. And, if the other team's not going to punish you for tripping a guy or cross-checking or whatever, then you can do that a little more often if you have to. You're not just going to take penalties for no reason, but if you have to clear a guy out in front of the net, you realize that you're probably not going to get you're not going to have to pay for it. It's not going to cost you on the scoreboard.
Well, I've said it many times on this podcast that I coach youth hockey. And one of my philosophies with my boys or my teams is that crash the net and good things will happen. Those liberties that you're just talking about, LA took advantage of it because every single time they were in the offensive zone, they went hard to that. It didn't matter who they ran into, even if it was the goalie or if there was a little bit of a spray, they just went hard, and they went hard, and they went hard, and it paid off.
It did, and it'll go down in history when you look at it as a 4-1 series win. Most of the Stanley Cups in the last really 15 years have gone 6 or 7 games, but it is fair to point out that 3 of those games went to overtime or double overtime, and just going back to Game 2, I think the Rangers, certainly New York fans will tell you they feel like Henrik Lundqvist got run over on a pretty key goal in that one. But regardless, you can't dispute the fact that LA, as these playoffs went on, was by far the best team. And you could make a very strong case that LA over Chicago Game 7 was pretty much the Stanley Cup. I know a lot of people were saying it that night. So now my question for you. This will be like a little game show. Do you want to go with my New York question or my LA question?
Both.
At the same time?
If you can do it, let's hear both questions come out of your mouth at the same time.
If we could play them over each other, that'd be good. First, I'll go with my LA question because I'm stealing it from you.
Okay.
Is this team going to be a dynasty?
Which team?
LA. New York would have to win so much to become a dynasty.
I think that they have the core to be so, yes. Will they? I think in the Western Conference, it's just too tough to do that. It's too tough to repeat. I will go back to what I said about Chicago. That the burden that Chicago had this year is now on LA. The only difference is LA doesn't have to play in the Olympics this year, but all the media focus, they are in LA. The networks are going to pick up a ton of LA games, and it's going to be on them. Reporters are going to be in their face. There's going to be high expectations on that team, expectations that the team didn't put on itself, expectations that have been put on the team from fans and media and outside forces that they're going to have to deal with. And then on top of that, the Western Conference is just so tough. It's going to be hard for that team to repeat. And to create a dynasty, you've got to be able to repeat not once, not twice, but at least 3 times.
Starting to sound like LeBron James. I would agree with pretty much everything you just said. The one, and I always seem to play devil's advocate on this show, you took my stance right there. So, I mean, it's not a knock on LA. It's the fact that you got to go through Chicago. You got to go through plenty of other strong, physical, improving teams in the Western
in your own conference
just to get back to the Stanley Cup.
Right.
I mean, if it's LA and New York again next year, and we'll get to New York in a second, I don't think they have much of a chance at all of getting back.
What about Colorado?
There's 8 or 9 teams that could maybe not come out of the West next year, but could trip you up in the playoffs if you're LA.
Easy.
The one thing I will say about LA, though, is they won the Cup this year. They won it 2 years ago, and last season, when they were kind of defending it, when they had that target on their back the first time, was a strike-shortened season.
Right.
Or lockout, I guess I should say. It wasn't a strike. But either way, it was a work stoppage that shortened the season. And they still almost got back to the Cup. I mean, they made the Western Conference Finals now 3 straight years, lost to Chicago, who went on to win the Cup. So it's just kind of, when you looked at Chicago this year, and you kind of looked at what they've done over the last couple of years, the last team that had taken them out prior to LA was Phoenix. That was 2 years ago. And now we're starting to get there with LA again, too. The last team that took them out was Chicago 2 years ago. And before that, I don't even know who it was, 2 years. It's going to take a lot to take this team out because they get better in the playoffs. And a lot of their key players are back. I mean, Marion Gaborik is a UFA. That's about it. Willie Mitchell.
I think maybe ask me this question in September.
Of 2019?
No,
okay.
Of this year, 2014. Ask me this question when after we've had the draft and we've had free agency and we've had some off-season changes. And we'll see what the front office of the LA Kings does. Do they stay pat? Do they tweak? I mean, we've talked about it many times on the show. Tanner Pearson, Tyler
Toffoli.
Tyler. I couldn't think of his first name. What a brilliant move to bring those 2 young skaters up and put them with Jeff Carter. Mr. Lombardi's looking like a genius. So I want to see what he does from the draft to training camp to see if he stays pat, makes a little tweak here, a little tweak there, or if he stays pat. I'd like to see what happens when preseason rolls around with this team.
Well, if you recall, last time they won the Stanley Cup, they literally changed nothing the next year. I mean, they kept the exact same team. And really, why wouldn't you? I mean, one team should be happy with their performance at the end of the season. And
tell me one spot on this team you would change.
The only thing that you're going to change is if you have to, if Marion
Backup goalie.
Even Martin Jones was good.
Yeah, he was.
If Marion Gaborik gets a ton of money thrown at him by somebody else, then you may lose him. You may lose Willie Mitchell, who was good, but yeah, you call up Tyler Toffoli and Tanner Pearson. You also are working in young guys like Slava Voinov and Alec Martinez on defense, and they've been great.
But Willie Mitchell's been in the press saying he wants to stay and he wants to play.
Why would you want to leave? Think about this. Why would you want to leave? Not only did you just win the Stanley Cup, you live in L.A. Really, why would you?
Thank you.
I mean, I know that some people hate the fact or the thought of living in L.A., but if you
Not this boy.
If you're there already and these guys are and they like it, I don't know why you'd leave.
I don't know why a lot of people are down on L.A. because I'm the opposite. I love L.A. I love the L.A. downtown. I love L.A. along the coast. I just love that whole area. So, I mean, if I'm a professional hockey player making some good coin, live in L.A., life is good.
And it's great, too, if you're just in Southern California and spend the day on the beach and then go play hockey. I mean, that's
tough life.
So then factor in that you're getting paid millions of dollars to do it and you're winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah, better life.
If I'm Marion Gaborik, I'm probably not leaving. Quickly now, my Rangers question for you.
Okay.
I look at their team, and I'm looking at just the guys that are signed for next year. There's not very many. But if you go, and we talked about this about a year ago.
Yeah, we did.
If you go to the 2015-16 season, there's 2 forwards currently signed. 2. And one of them they want to buy out. You have Brad Richards, who's signed through 2020, and you've got Rick Nash, who signed through 2018. Which one of those guys, if you had your choice, are you holding on to? Because they can only buy out one. And they're not going to buy out Rick Nash, but I'm just posing this question to you.
I would move Rick Nash.
Because you could probably trade him, although he's $7.8 million cap hit per year, and he's just such an enigma. He really is.
He needs something because, I mean, he played better in Columbus. He struggled in New York. He had some decent numbers. By the end of the playoffs, he had some decent numbers. But when it came to clutch time, he just wasn't there.
I almost felt bad for him because in Game 5, in that double overtime, the puck comes over to him, kind of at a weird angle.
He had an open net.
And he did everything right, though. He didn't rush the shot. He shot it, and I don't remember which LA King it was that just dove over and smacked the puck right out of the air with their stick. And it's not going in for you. Was it Alec Martinez?
No, the Russian.
Mitchell? Oh, it was Voinov. You're right.
It was Voinov.
Yeah.
He stuck his – because the reason I remember it, the play, was I saw Nash come down the wing. I saw the open net, and you're right. He took his time. He looked. He took the shot. That puck was going in, and then – oh, look, there's a stick in the shot lane.
It wasn't, and he even lifted it. I mean, Voinov knocked the puck essentially out of the air.
Yep.
You got to that point in the playoffs where if it was Rick Nash shooting, it just wasn't going in, no matter what he did.
Yeah, I think a change of scenery might help Rick Nash.
The Rangers make it to the Cup next year. Is there any chance?
No.
Okay, Henrik Lundqvist.
Because the team that should have been in there from the East is Boston, and I think Boston will be there next year.
And I think Montreal will be strong. I mean, there's a lot of
Montreal will be knocking on the door, but Boston should have been there. I don't know why they...
Because they played Montreal.
Yeah.
And it's just a bad matchup. I mean, Boston beats New York, I think. Montreal, I still think, beats New York if Carey Price doesn't get hurt. But the Rangers have Lundqvist signed. Here's who they have signed past next year. Lundqvist, Dan Girardi, Ryan McDonough, Kevin Kline, Rick Nash, Brad Richards. That's your whole team past next year. And you're going to buy Brad Richards out, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So... We got a couple more here. I've wondered about this, and I can't find it. And if somebody knows, they should write into the show. You can't call in.
At thehockeypodcast@gmail.com.
Yes. Or at hockeypodcast on Twitter.
Yes.
I wondered what LA's odds were to win the Stanley Cup when they were down 3-0 to San Jose. And I can't find it anywhere on the internet. The internet has failed me. But when they were down 3-2 to San Jose, they were 28-1. So I can only kind of project. I mean, they were probably close to 100-1.
That's a big projection. From 28 to 100?
But they were down 3-0. When you're down 3-0.
Maybe 50-1.
In the first round?
Double it. 50-1.
No. Double and then double again for each game. Which leads me to the odds for the next year's Stanley Cup.
Okay.
Boston and Chicago are both the favorites right now at 8-1. Which I think is what a lot of people thought the Stanley Cup was going to be this year.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit. I can see, because I just said I expect Boston to be there next year. Chicago's interesting.
It's hard to project a team from the West. It really is.
Because right behind Chicago is L.A. at 12-1. Pittsburgh's at 12-1. St. Louis is at 12-1.
I don't know.
Now let's talk about St. Louis.
Yeah, they don't.
They always get these high projections and then fizzle out.
And then they don't win in the playoffs.
So I don't know what the odds makers are looking at that I don't see. You got the Sharks at 14-1.
Well, some of that is people, I guess essentially betting on it, though. I mean, that's what drives these odds a little bit. So people, the public seems to think that St. Louis is going to be back, and they have a good team. The one thing I would say is these are going to change a lot really within the next 2 weeks because of the free agency and all the trades.
Let's go to the top 10, and if you look at it, it's the usual suspects again. It's always the same, right? It's Boston, Chicago, L.A., Pittsburgh, St. Louis, San Jose, Anaheim, Minnesota, Colorado.
Colorado's new.
Montreal. So Colorado, Montreal are 9 and 10.
New York's tied with them, and so is Detroit.
I think Colorado is probably a little bit higher on that list, and so is Montreal.
If you were making the list?
If I'm making the list, I would move those up a little bit because I think with a year that Colorado had going into this season, hopefully they don't have a sophomore slump with their new coach.
Yeah.
But I think they should improve.
They should improve, and I think I would agree with you maybe if we were just doing a list of the 10 best teams. But I don't think they'll win the Cup next year. In
I don't
fact,
think they'll win
there's
the
probably
Cup.
teams lower on the list I would take to win the actual Stanley Cup. You wanted to mention the graphic, your favorite graphic of the broadcast.
I was going through some stats, and then there was a breakdown of goalie analysis. Okay?
Okay.
So, Quick versus Lundqvist. So now we've got this beautiful graphic, and we've got the outline of a goalie. One represents Quick, one represents Lundqvist. We have the number of shots represented in dots, like a target, right?
Okay.
So I'm at a shooting range, and I'm shooting at this silhouette. And then we've got all these dots that hit the grade shadow, right? Those are the shots that hit the goalie.
Yeah.
And then on the perimeter of the shadow of the silhouette are all the goals that went in. And
Shocker.
I went, really?
So the ones that weren't around
The
going
ones,
into the goalie went in.
Like that dot that's right in the middle of the goalie's chest that didn't go in.
That's where I like to shoot. That's my shot.
That wasn't a goal.
No, that's. I always shoot right for the logo. Everybody's happy.
And I'm thinking to myself when I saw it, I mean, I'm being a little cynical and a little sarcastic. It's like somebody had to develop a software technology to track it, and then a software technology to take that data to show me this graphic that the shots that are around the outside of the silhouette, which would be the outside of the goalie, those are the ones that went in the net.
You are a very, very cynical man.
Like,
always
look,
so cynical.
Look, there's a dot that went between the goalie's legs. That was a goal.
What about the ones
Really?
that went just wide of the net? Is there anything for those?
No, those don't count as shots on goal.
Okay, shots at goal.
I just thought it was kind of humorous.
Well, it's like a shooter tutor. It's like the things you would put up in front of your net when you didn't
Yes,
have a goalie.
we use shooter tutor when we don't have a goalie.
You still use them now?
Still use them to this day.
I told you. I have told you this. I saw and I can't remember which store it was here, but it was a shooter tutor of Marc-Andre Fleury.
Was it one big hole?
It's just an empty box.
Where'd you see that?
I mean, that's the real thing. I saw it, and I was just laughing uncontrollably in the store. And, I mean, it was a pretty silent store. It's not like there was 8,000 people holding a convention in there, and people are looking at me like, why is this guy laughing? It was a shooter tutor box with Marc-Andre Fleury's face on it. And I so wanted to ask the guy who ran the store, is this just empty?
No, it's just one big hole in the middle.
There's one little corner that's covered.
Right.
Is it regular season shooter tutor or playoff? Because that's different.
That would be different.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Hockey Podcast. Feel free to email comments or questions to the show at our email address, thehockeypodcast@gmail.com.
Segment 2. The games are done, Doug, but really hockey season. When would you say the actual off season for hockey is? Because coming up now we have the draft in a week and a half. We've got the NHL Awards show in less than a week. We've got free agency right after the draft. There's going to be trades. So really like the only month where you have no hockey is like August.
Yeah, because we'll have rookie camps in July.
Yeah.
So August is going to be the month that's like really slow.
Did I tell you I looked to see if there were any hockey leagues anywhere that played in the summer? I feel like there should be a summer hockey league. I feel like I should start this. This could be my calling in life. There's one. It's in Australia. And it made me wonder if everything, because you know how everything kind of backwards in Australia? Like the water goes down the drain differently? Like do you think icing?
That's not true.
It's not?
No.
I've never been to Australia.
That's a fallacy.
Everything's upside down?
They're down under, yes.
Okay. And it rains upwards? And
Wow.
Oh, okay. So then icing wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be the opposite there. That's not what it's going to be like. That's the only
It's
summer
very
league.
warm there. It's very desert-like, very
But
similar to where we live.
But it's winter there, isn't it?
Yes, because it's below the equator, right?
So they should be playing in the summer.
Correct.
So there, if you need hockey to follow in August, the Australian Ice Hockey League, I should get something for that. I should get like a jersey, like a wallaby or something holding a hockey stick.
Or an invite to go play.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll take that. Nice trip.
All expenses paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a cheap flight from Phoenix to Australia.
No, it is not. So anyway, the point of all that, after you distracted me and derailed me,
Okay.
the awards show is coming up here in a couple days in Las Vegas.
In Las Vegas.
I will be there.
Sin City.
We did the preview last
What
week.
happens Vegas stays in Vegas.
Except the awards. They get to take those home, right? That'd be
No,
kinda
they
cool.
they receive it on stage and then they give it back to the NHL.
Because it stays in Vegas. Well, we talked about our predictions, and rest assured, I will give you a running tally of those when
Okay.
we do the next podcast. of
Did you just
how many I
tell
was right.
the THP fans you will be there?
I will be there.
Okay.
I will get us audio. We will hear from players on next week's show.
Okay.
However, we didn't talk about the Conn Smythe
Episode
yet.
45.
Yeah. We're really setting the bar high for episode 45.
Yes, we are.
We're making promises that I actually think we can keep this time.
Well, let's do it.
Conn Smythe, though, you wanted to quickly touch on this.
We didn't talk about it in the first segment, and it ties in with the playoffs.
And it's already been awarded, obviously.
It's been awarded. Justin Williams won it, and I'm very happy for him. But when the announcement was made, I was kind of taken aback. How did you feel about that choice?
At the point that the game was over and that series was over, I was not surprised by it. I told you my pick going in.
Based on what, though? Why were you not surprised?
I think a lot was made of the fact that he is the all-time leading scorer in NHL history in Game 7s, and partially that's because they went to 3 Game 7s. He was huge. I mean, people have to remember that Conn Smythe isn't for the Stanley Cup. It's for the whole playoffs. It's just the Stanley Cup's weighted heavier.
But it seems that it was based on his numbers in the Stanley Cup Final.
Maybe.
He was the leading goal scorer. He was the leading point getter.
Yeah.
I mean, the leading guys in the series, according to NHL.com, was Justin Williams, and Jonathan Quick, based on points, based on stats for those 5 games. My whole take was that I had chosen Jeff Carter because I thought Jeff Carter being put on that line, that 70s line, with Tanner Pearson and Tyler Toffoli. I can never pronounce that young kid's name.
It's okay. He's not going anywhere, so you're gonna have to learn.
I'm gonna have to struggle. That line through the 26 games of the playoffs that the Kings played racked up 51 points.
That's unreal. I don't know what's more unreal, that number or the fact that you're bringing stats to the show every week.
So, rounding it up, that's almost 2 points a game from one line. Jeff Carter was the anchor of that line. He's the one that made that line produce. 2
points per game from what was essentially their second line, at least when the playoffs started, on a team that generally doesn't need a lot of goals to win games throughout the Chicago series, because that was nothing made sense in that series. But if you are getting 2 points from that line, that's why you won the Stanley Cup.
Right. So then now compound on top of that, you got a guy like Marian Gaborik.
That was my pick going in.
I got a goaltender in Jonathan Quick. And then I have a defenseman in Drew Doughty.
And you also have the leading point producer in the playoffs in Anze Kopitar with 26, although Jeff Carter and Justin Williams both got to 25 in that Stanley Cup.
So I was like, I understand why Justin Williams won it, but I was like, man, that team was loaded. It could have been any one of those guys.
You know, I thought about this. If you looked at it and you said, okay, we've named off 6 guys that were legitimate Conn Smythe contenders
Absolutely.
from one team. And we did this going into the series. We went through 4 or 5 different guys.
Right.
I mean, if the Rangers had won, it would have just been Lundqvist.
Lundqvist.
So that says something, A, about the Kings. And B, my thought was, okay, take one of these guys off the team. Which one you take off, do they instantly not win the Cup? And honestly, you probably could have taken any of them if it was just one, and they probably still would have won the Cup because they were just so deep.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, Gaborik had 14 goals. Nobody else even close, and he doesn't even get a sniff.
I just wanted to bring it up because when they made the announcement, I went, "Whoa, my head wasn't there," you know?
Yeah.
So, but I know my picks for the awards because we went over it last show are all bang on, and I'm right, you're wrong.
Well, that's not accurate.
And we'll find out when you come back from audio, and hopefully you'll get Sid Crosby, and Sid Crosby will go, that Cannon guy, he just knows his stuff. So you shouldn't sit across the table from him and argue because he's just always right.
Well, I'm pretty sure you picked against Sid Crosby in the Hart Trophy.
Well, I guess I have to because you're a Pittsburgh
I'll
fan.
make sure I throw that to him for the setup.
Okay, so then after the awards show, when you leave Vegas.
So if he loses, I'll ask him to get that sounder you asked for. Yeah, Doug was right. That's why I didn't win.
Well, can you get him to have a liner? Hey, this is Sid Crosby. You're listening to the Hockey Podcast, and Doug Cannon is always right.
Well, no, I'm not going to ask the guy to lie. I mean,
come on, man. It'd be great.
No, I want to get him to say you're listening to the number game, and we can play it on episode 87. That'd be fantastic.
Then we have to pick him.
Who else are you going to pick that wears number 87?
I don't know. I'll find somebody.
Yeah, sure you will. All right, well, maybe you'll find somebody in the draft, which is coming up on June 27th.
A week from
Yes.
June 27th.
Florida still
a day after my birthday.
Well, there you go. That's a birthday present for you.
I get to sit down with a 6-pack of beer and watch the draft.
Can you say beer on the air?
I just did.
Okay. Root beer, obviously, is what we're talking about.
This is a podcast. This is like cable. This is like HBO.
Oh, you can say
I can say that. Oh, no, I didn't say it.
You could say you're sitting down with a 6-pack of Everclear.
Ooh, yeah.
For the draft. That's a weird way to get through the draft.
Yeah, I don't want to get through the draft that way. I just want to have a couple of wobbly pops and some pretzels.
Sometimes I think some teams draft that way, but that's a whole different podcast. Florida still is the number one pick. It's seeming more and more like Aaron Ekblad will be that pick.
What about Samuel Bennett?
Well,
he can't do pull-ups. I don't want that guy. He can't do pull-ups.
Yeah, if we ever get stuck into a American Ninja competition, he probably isn't going to win. So if you look at this draft, the landscape is kind of there's 4 kind of clear-cut top 4 picks.
Well, if Aaron Ekblad goes, I mean, it's a defenseman.
Yeah, I know. You'll be very happy. That'll be your birthday present. Aaron Ekblad, Sam Bennett, Sam Reinhart, and Leon Draisaitl are your 4 guys.
Right.
It seems like those 4 will go in some order. And then, was it Michael Del Cole is supposed to go basically 5th, which is where the Islanders are. And you never know what the Islanders are going to do. They might take 7 defensemen again. So with that in mind, if Florida keeps that first pick, and they could very well trade it, it sounds like they're shopping it. You going defense or you going forward?
First of all, if Florida is shopping the first pick,
yes.
Are they shopping it first pick for stirring the pot, or are they actually shopping the first pick? I mean, is it a strategy at this point that I have the first pick and I'm going to stir the pot and see what comes up?
Yeah, everybody, you have to
know
shop
what I mean?
the first pick.
You have to, right?
Yeah.
You've got the golden card.
Unless
you
it's
got
like
the Willy
Ovechkin.
Wonka wrapper.
Yeah. Yeah, you would have shopped the golden ticket in Willy Wonka. You just shop it around just in case. So I don't know. I mean, maybe they are intent on taking Ekblad. Maybe they're intent on taking somebody else. But as I look up and down this list of other teams, if I'm Florida, at least the way I'm looking at this draft, I would be fine if I traded the number 1 pick for pick 2 and something, pick 3 and something, or pick 4 and something. Just because those 4 guys are supposed to be their own tier, basically.
Okay. So are we going for the best player, or are we going for the best position?
Well, you have to go best player.
Okay, so you have to go best player.
It's not like Florida has a logjam anywhere where they can't fit a really good player.
Well, and again, this isn't the NBA. This isn't the NFL. These players aren't going to play right away.
Well, the first pick should.
I don't know if Sam Bennett's going to play right away.
Because of the pull-ups.
Because of the pull-ups.
Yeah, I know you can't get past that.
I mean, look at the picks last year. Seth Jones played. Nathan McKinnon played. Nathan McKinnon made an impact.
Jonathan Drouin did not.
No, he did not.
And he was one of those guys that might have been a number 1 pick. I mean, there was talk of that. Alexander Barkov did, and then he got hurt at the Olympics.
Max Domi did not.
Yeah, but I mean, at that point, you're getting down to pick 12.
Correct.
I'm just saying that within the top 4. Okay, let's do this little side bet. All right? Of these top 4 players, how many of them, and that's Ekblad, Bennett, Reinhart, and Draisaitl, how many of them play next season, do you think? Because I think 3 of them will play.
I think Kapanen does.
Okay. All right. Well, I know where your mind's at.
I just had to do it. I'm sorry.
Sammy Kapanen or Kasperi Kapanen?
Kasperi.
That is a good name.
That's a great name. Double K.
All right. Well,
K squared.
This bet will be with myself. Apparently, I think 3 of the 4 will play, and I think Florida.
You really think that 3 of the 4? 75%. 75%
of those top 4. Yes, I know. I can do the math. Thank you.
Wow, that's a big number, Luke.
That's 3/4.
That's a big number. I disagree with that.
All right. Well, give me a number. You can't just sit there disagreeing, and then when 4 out of 4 play, you're like, see? Told you it wasn't 3 out of 4.
I say 25%.
That's 1 out of 4, Doug.
That's 1.
And you just think it's the number 1 pick?
I think the number 1 pick out of those 4.
Okay. That's fair. Well, that'll give us something else to watch for this season. Maybe Edmonton, maybe Calgary would trade up to number 1. They both need defense. Calgary needs everything.
So does Edmonton.
Edmonton does,
actually needs more D and goaltending.
Of those top 4, yeah. I mean, if I'm a team that's going to trade up, Edmonton, if they don't think they can get Ekblad at 3, maybe they should do it.
Right. Isn't it funny? In the top 50 oh, never mind. Never mind.
So it's not funny.
No, it's not funny. I was looking at something incorrectly, and I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth. I'm going to stop right there. The filter popped in at the right time. So, therefore, I am not embarrassed.
First time for everything.
Yes, there is.
I saw this headline looking at the draft stuff. Buffalo would like a second first-round pick. All right. We'll just have one. Go ahead.
Well, I heard there's a couple of teams that are like 3 or 4 first-round picks if they could get them.
They have to get in line behind Buffalo
because they want to.
Buffalo asked first. New Jersey picks 30th. That's the other main storyline heading in.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean,
Because today,
so they got a first-round pick.
Today is June 19th, the day that we're recording this podcast.
It's almost midnight.
June 19th. Okay.
Yeah.
A press release went out with the draft order.
It's good.
I thought we already knew that.
Well, I feel like we did.
After the lottery,
yeah.
didn't we kind of know what the order was?
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't expecting New Jersey not to be picking at 30.
Yeah, no, there were no surprises when that came out today. I understand why they did it, just because the season's over and you want to remind everybody that the draft is a week away.
Correct.
But yeah, spoiler alert, everything stayed the same.
Spoiler alert, yep.
This year's draft, too, I will say, is not supposed to be as strong from top to bottom as last year's. I mean, you mentioned Max Domi. He went 12th last year. He probably goes 3rd or 4th this year.
No, so as a hockey fan, start watching the middle rounds and see who gets picked during those middle rounds, because that's where you're going to find the nuggets. Yes, the top 10 are the top 10. You can't dispute the top 10. But when you get into round 3, 4, and 5 and those middle picks and you see where your team's picking, that's where those nuggets are. I think that's where teams will make hay. Yes, you won't see those guys for 2-3 years, but remember 2014 where your team picked in rounds 3, 4, and 5, because that's where you're going to find probably the guys that will develop.
Well, that's where you get the guys that change the course of your franchise. As weird as it is, you either get the guy at number 1 or whatever in the top 15.
If you're lucky to have that, yes.
Look, Pittsburgh and Chicago both went through that path of being terrible and getting a bunch of number 1 picks and becoming good. Edmonton went through that path of being terrible, getting a bunch of number 1 picks and staying terrible. But generally speaking, to have the sustained success, you got to have those top picks. But LA really never had a top pick. They hit on those middle rounds, like you're saying. And Lundqvist was a 7th rounder. Pavel Datsyuk is famously a very late rounder.
But here's my thinking, and I try to equate it, and it's hard. I try to equate it to baseball. When you have a farm system in place and you stack your farm system, it does nothing but help the parent club. So those middle rounds aren't your superstars, but they're quality hockey players. And they're sitting in the juniors, they're sitting in their college teams, and they're playing lots of games for 3 to 4 years. And then they go to your AHL club, and they get a little bit more seasoning there. And by the time they're ready, when they're 22, 23, you've got good, solid hockey players with good, solid experience. Tanner Pearson, Tyler Toffoli. Yes, LA didn't have number 1 picks, but they had the meat. And that meat is coming through the system. That meat is developing your junior players through your minor league to your parent club.
Well, and if you're hitting on a pick in round 6 or whatever, Sergei Fedorov went in round 4. I'm looking at a list here of some of the best steals of all time. If you're getting Sergei Fedorov in round 4,
that's what I'm talking about.
Not only are you getting him, but if you could kind of graph it out of the quality of player you're getting compared to everybody else at that point,
right?
I mean, for the most part, the guys you're getting in, let's say, round 5, round 6, may never see the NHL. And then if you're coming out with just a huge steal, right. Ryan Miller went in the 5th round.
So that's amazing.
I'm trying to find guys that weren't Pavel Datsyuk or Henrik Lundqvist, because those are the 2 of the most famous ones. Nicholas Lidstrom went in the 3rd round. I mean, the point is, when you get a guy like that, the guys around you, the teams around you aren't getting a player anywhere near that caliber. Whereas if you're picking 13th and you hit on your pick and somebody else picking 15th and they hit on their pick, ultimately those players should be about the same.
Jamie Benn, Dallas, 5th round.
Dallas had quite a few, actually. If you start going through Dallas, they've got a few. And it's just if it's an impact player, it's a huge advantage. So,
right.
Yeah, what we're saying is watch the entire draft.
You're tuned into the Hockey Podcast. Follow us on Twitter @HockeyPodcast for even more hockey news.
#do it.
Final segment, news and notes. Doug, just to piggyback my own point from the end of the last segment. I finally got the website to work. Henrik Zetterberg, 8th round. Brett Hull, 6th round. These are all guys that were pretty good. Dominic Hasek in the 10th. We don't even have a 10th round anymore.
That's unbelievable.
So
it kind of supports what we were discussing.
Although I guess guys like Hasek and Hall never even played for the teams that drafted them. So really at that point you're just bringing in good players for somebody else. It kind of destroys our entire argument.
But the point is that just because you're drafted number 1 doesn't mean you're any better than the guy that was drafted in the 5th round. Dominic Hasek was drafted in the 10th, and he's like a Hall of Famer.
It should mean you're better.
Right.
And on an individual basis, it usually does. But when you look at the whole spectrum and I don't have the numbers here, but you're the one that told me 50% of first-rounders ultimately don't even play.
Right. 50% of first-round draft picks don't make the show.
And yet, if you look at the last 15 years, the number one overall pick has not only been a player in the league pretty much every year. There might be one exception in there, but they're an all-star. I mean, a lot of these guys are probably going to the Hall of Fame, so you can't miss with that first pick if you have it.
Right. Well, we'll see about the sophomore slumps next year.
Yeah, well,
See if that mojo
that's true.
follows them.
Neil Yakupov not currently on pace to be in the Hall of Fame. All right, Calder Cup.
Wow.
Texas Stars win it in overtime.
Texas Stars take it in 5 games. They win it in overtime. Now, this goes back to what we started with in the first segment. When you get into a playoff where you're playing for the championship, it should go down to the wire. You kind of expect a 7-game series. The Calder Cup was only a 5-game series, but the last 3 games were all overtime games.
It's kind of like the Stanley Cup this year.
So, I mean, it was a 2-1 win for Texas, a 4-3 win for Texas, a 4-3 win in Game 5 for Texas. God bless the NHL radio network, because I got to hear Game 5 because the network carried the game, and I'm sitting in my driveway listening to the end of the third period going into overtime because it was that exciting. And I'm like, it's a shame that there aren't television networks, but at least the radio network stepped up so that I could at least hear the game.
Yeah.
That, NHL network television should have carried that game.
I'm a little surprised they didn't, because they do carry they carried the Memorial Cup. They had the World Championships. Obviously NBC has the right for the Olympics, but it's not just the NHL. It's on the NHL Network.
Right. And to me, the NHL Network
they had some of the games too, but go ahead.
Should be carrying, especially the AHL. I mean, I don't want to get into the CHL and the ECHL, and that's nothing against those leagues, but the AHL is like AAA ball in baseball,
Pretty
right?
much, yeah.
That's your league. And it's the championship, man. You're playing for the championship. And I'm sure if I go down the roster of the Texas Stars and St. John's, you're going to see a few guys in the NHL.
Well, and Dallas has had a pretty good run lately of guys that they have picked kind of going through the system and coming up and now making an impact. And the Stars finally made the playoffs this year. Whether they make it again next year or not, they've got more reinforcements on the way.
And who is the coach of the Texas Stars?
That would be Willie Desjardins.
Oh, which segues into my next point.
If I'd known you were going to make that sound, I would have given the wrong answer.
All right. Well, Pittsburgh's looking at him.
Pittsburgh is apparently looking at everybody.
Well,
not Dan Bilesma, you're right.
Let's kind of look at it a different way. We had a long conversation that we thought that Ulf Samuelsson was going to go to Carolina, and the reason that Carolina really didn't pick a coach sooner was because Ulf was still in the playoffs with the Rangers.
Yeah, that was misleading.
And he has a relationship with Ron Francis. They played together. Correct?
Oh, yeah.
So we both thought it would be a good pick. I mean, Ulf's a great coach. He's a great guy. That I thought for sure that he was going to be the next head coach of the Carolina Hurricanes. But I was wrong.
Well, we talked about Bill Peters, who they hired today.
They hired Bill Peters from Detroit.
We did talk about him a good month or so ago, but when the playoffs continued to go on and they hadn't hired a coach yet, it did seem more and more like Ulf would be the leading guy, just because Detroit has been out for a month and a half.
Mm-hmm.
If they really wanted him, they could have maybe gotten him earlier. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. I mean, they have him now. So they fill their coaching vacancy. We're down to 3. We've got Florida, who, again, they have the first pick. As I've said all along, I feel like they should have a coach more than anybody before the draft. Pittsburgh, who just got the vacancy a couple weeks ago, and Vancouver, who knows what they're doing. I don't know.
So now I've read where Willie Desjardins is being looked at by Pittsburgh.
I think everybody should look at him.
I saw Ulf's name come up for Pittsburgh.
And he has ties there too, obviously.
So the outsiders right now are Florida and Vancouver.
When they're both looking at Bilesma. And everybody was kind of looking at John Stevens, it seemed, but he just got promoted to associate coach in L.A.
So if Willie doesn't go to Pittsburgh, let's say Pittsburgh goes to Ulf.
Or John Hines, who's Pittsburgh's AHL coach, who they talked about a while ago, too. Or Mark Crawford, who they apparently talked to.
Does Willie go to Vancouver? Does Willie go to Florida? Oh, and the one name that we're forgetting here is Doug McClain's name came up for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and this is not a knock on these names that we're hearing, but this goes back to my own. If I was ever an NHL GM, I only want to change coaches when a really good coach becomes available. And I look at my coach, and I don't have a problem if you're Vancouver and you're looking at Tortorella this year and you're saying it's just not working. And, oh, look, so-and-so's available. We can upgrade. We have to do this. But when you just fire a coach to fire the coach, it's there's not a lot of great proven names bouncing around here. Pittsburgh and Vancouver need a proven coach. Their time to win is now if they're going to do it.
I think the hardest decision right now is two. One, Pittsburgh. That is a team that is loaded with veterans and very talented veterans. You're going to need a special guy to come in and be able to control that room and to control those players during practice.
Yeah, because you can't let them run over you, but at the same time, you do have to understand that some of those guys are different than a lot of the players around the league.
Right, so that takes a special coach to be able to manage that.
Generally somebody that's proven. Like if Mike Babcock was available, I'd be fine with
Yeah,
Pittsburgh
but
getting
he's got
him.
a job.
Yeah, exactly.
So then let's go to Florida. We've got a lot of young guys, and you're starting to rebuild, and you got a great goalie in Luongo, so you've got that. So is that a fit for Willie Desjardins?
I think that sort of coach, for sure. I think that I look at what Edmonton did, and I know it hasn't worked for them yet. But if you have a young collection of talent that's going to grow together and potentially get better and start to build together, I don't have a problem bringing in a young coach at the beginning of that too, and they all just kind of get better
and maturate together.
Yeah, but it's a risk because if you do that and that coach doesn't have what it takes to coach the NHL level, then you've set yourself back 2 or 3 more years.
But you have to have, don't you think that you have to have, when you start with a new coach, and I don't care if you've got a young coach, an older coach, a seasoned coach, or whatever, but when you start with a new coach, wow, I just threw a pen.
Don't get all angry over there.
You have to have a plan in place. And in my mind, it has to be a 3 to 5 year plan. You can't just bring a guy in for a year and say, well, he didn't work out, I'm going to go on to the next guy, because all you're doing is repeating it. You've got to at least give it 3 to 5 years. So I was always told once is not a trend, twice is not a trend, but 3 times is a trend. So if you've got a guy that's coaching first year, second year, third year, and the same thing keeps happening after 3 years, then you've got it. You can legitimately say, look, you're trending the wrong way. I need to make a change.
I hear what you're saying, but with the world we live in right now, you don't have 5 years for sure, and NHL teams aren't even taking 3 years. Again, this is
whatever happened to patience.
It's long gone, unless you're talking about the Guns N' Roses song, in which case it's with us every day.
It's a good tune. Yeah.
It is. 25 teams have switched head coaches at least once since 2010. Ugh. I mean, I gave you that stat a month ago, and another one switched since then. So, literally, the only coaches that have been with their current team since before 2010, which is 4 years ago, Claude Julien, Joel Quenneville, Mike Babcock, Dave Tippett, Todd McClellan.
Wow.
And 4 of those guys, I think 4 of them have won Coach of the Year before, haven't they?
Yes.
And then Todd McClellan, he was almost out this year. So it was almost 26 out of 30. So I think the thought process for a team, especially like Florida, is we'll hire him, and if it's terrible this year, he's gone. If it doesn't work for 2 years, he's probably gone.
So then that leaves us Vancouver.
Well, they switch coaches every other year, it feels like. I mean, they got rid of Alan Vigneault, and he went to the Stanley Cup with somebody else.
But there's so much turmoil in Vancouver that I would have almost wanted a coach 2 months ago.
Yeah, ideally, yeah.
Because as soon as you let Tortorella go, then I think that you should have only given yourself a really small window to replace him, because there's going to be some changes in Vancouver, roster-wise.
Yeah.
And I would want my coach part of that.
I feel like Vancouver's going to end up with Dan Bilesma. I don't know why. I mean, obviously his name
I think he'd be a good fit there.
And they can almost justify, we waited around and this guy wasn't even available when we started. So we're almost better off because of it. And so they can at least kind of look at it that way. He's established. He's won a Stanley Cup. So he's the only name I've heard out there that's won a Stanley Cup that I can think of.
Well, he's also one of those guys that's dealt with seasoned, experienced, talented players. So Sedin twins come to mind right away.
Yeah, although Vancouver has less and less of these seasoned, talented, experienced players
they
if
keep
they lose Kessler.
getting rid of them. So,
but they will have the Sedin twins, and they've still got quality players there. It is remarkable what Vancouver's done to their roster over the last couple of years.
It's kind of chewed it up. Booth went on waivers.
That used to be a scary team, and I think they can get back to it, but they're not there right now.
No, they've got a lot of fixing to do in that city to get that team back to where it was.
We have to transition to Jason
They got lots
Spezza.
of fixing. Lots of fixing to do.
Because I don't know what that was. Jason Spezza, for
Fixin'.
whatever reason, seems to want out of Ottawa. Very clearly wants out of Ottawa.
Actually, I think Jason Spezza wants out of Canada.
Well, yeah, that was
And that
kind of
upsets me. He's a Toronto boy.
It's kind of the newest development. Maybe you can shed some light on why exactly he does. Because
I don't know why.
You and I had this conversation a couple shows ago where we just kind of said, take all the history of the teams and the fans and everything, just take it out of the equation.
He's a Torontonian.
Where is that what they call them up there? Torontonians?
I don't know.
You're from there.
He's from Ontario, I can tell you that.
Oh, all right. Sounds like a cereal. You just look around the league and you're like, oh, I would play there. Oh, I would play here. It's different for every player. It seems like Jason Spezza has kind of he's done with the whole pressures that come with every single time you touch the puck in Canada.
Okay, so he's given Mr. Murray a list of 10 places he will not go. 6 of those places are Canadian cities.
And they're all of the Canadian cities.
All of the Canadian
it's
cities.
not like he said, oh, but I'll go to Vancouver.
Nope.
Nope. I want out of Ottawa, and don't trade me anywhere else in Canada.
Right.
Is what he's saying. And then also, just to make sure I'm clear, not Nashville or Florida or the Islanders or Columbus. I don't know what Columbus did. They had a good team last year.
They had a very good team last year.
So what do you read into this?
The only thing I can take from it is that since he was drafted second overall in the 2001 draft, he's had a lot of pressures on him. Rightfully so. He's a talented player. People expect a lot. And when you play in Canada and you play for a Canadian team, the Canadian fans expect a lot. And as you and I have a rule, don't read the comments, there's probably a lot of negative fan feedback coming his way that he's not obeying the rule and he's reading the comments. And maybe he's just one of those individuals. I am totally making huge assumptions here, big general sweeps.
Okay.
I know I am. But I got a feeling he just wants to get out of Canada, to get out from underneath that microscope, and play hockey. He wants to go somewhere where he can just go play hockey, doesn't have to deal with the bozo media circus that the Canadian teams bring, and just lace him up and go.
I'm a big Jason Spezza fan. I always have been.
I think he's a heck of a player.
As I've said before, he's one of the few players I ever remember hearing a lot about before they ever were really even in junior. I remember hearing about Crosby. I remember hearing about Spezza. I remember hearing about Lindros. And I'm sure there's been others, but in my kind of timeline, those are the guys that I really knew about before they ever even – I heard about them when they were getting drafted into junior, essentially. So you look at his numbers. He's had a 92-point season, a 90-point season, a couple 80-plus seasons, a 70. He had a couple years with some injuries in there. But I look at Ottawa – as a team that greatly underachieved last year. If I'm him, if I go back there, you've got Erik Karlsson, you've got a good coach in Paul McLean, you've got a decent goaltender in Craig Anderson. So, if he really wants out, it sounds like there's already been 2 pretty serious offers, even with that list of teams that he won't go to out there. He's got a no trade clause, so he can say that.
He had 66 points last year.
Yeah, and that was kind of a quote off year for him.
Well, he played 75 games, but he had 66 points.
It's basically almost a point per game. You're not going to get that from a lot of players. He's not old. What is he, 30?
He's only 31.
So you're going to get more years out of him. This is the kind of cautionary part of this, though, if you're a team looking to trade for him. He's only signed for 1 more season.
Okay.
But let's just briefly here. Let's play the game.
Well, here, wait. One more stat
really brief.
One more stat to throw at you before you get to the next point. He's 6'3", 220. That's a big boy. A big boy down the middle that can score.
I've always looked at him as the leader on that team. I know Daniel Alfredson was there too,
sure,
but Jason Spezza. And yeah, when you have a center like that with size who can score and can be a playmaker, when he's healthy, he's one of the top, 20, 30 players in the league.
I would think so, yeah.
So I'm just going to assume that if Ottawa does trade him, they don't want to trade him to anybody in the East. So let's just eliminate all those teams right there. If you're Ottawa, you can't trade him to Detroit, where he
So
teams
now he's
up with
coming to the West.
So now he's coming to the West, except he's not going to Nashville, he said. He's not going to Winnipeg. He's not going to Vancouver, Calgary, or Edmonton. So you're really – this is the list of teams if you just kind of do the logical work here. L.A., San Jose, Anaheim, Phoenix, Dallas, Minnesota, Chicago, St. Louis, Colorado. Now, St. Louis and Anaheim have already said they're very interested, but they're very interested in everybody, apparently. That's not a lot of options.
Well, I mean, it's nice to hear that coming out of St. Louis and Anaheim. I mean, we've already talked about how tough the Western Conference is, but Anaheim and St. Louis should have gone deeper in the playoffs. I had Anaheim going all the way. They fell short. So they're at least saying to their fan base, we need something, and maybe this is the X factor. St. Louis is doing the same thing to their fan base. You know, I'm surprised San Jose hasn't thrown their hat in there.
Well, they don't they don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing yet.
No, they don't.
That's a whole entirely different show. But you look at that list of, 9 teams? Not going to L.A. They don't have any room. They've already got their team built.
Yeah, he's not going to L.A.
So you can almost throw them out. So now you're down to 8.
Minnesota. That'd be a big pickup for Minnesota.
They seem to make a big pickup every year.
Because you've also got the rumor flying around out there that Thomas Vanek wants to go to Minnesota. Could you imagine Spezza and Vanek both going?
At some point they have to run out of money. But what if Chicago, and I'd have to look at their cap situation closer.
I don't even want to think about that.
That would be terrible because the one knock on Chicago, and again, air quotes, which work great on the podcast, is that they don't have a great number 2 center.
Well, Spezza would be that.
In there, yeah.
Chicago would be a hard team to stop.
I don't think they could make that work financially.
Well, the other rumor prior to that was Chicago was looking at Thornton because Thornton's name was being thrown around that San Jose was going to unload him.
For the sake of next season, I don't need Chicago adding any future Hall of Famers to their roster.
No, we don't need that.
We just keep Chicago the way they are, and they're fine with that, right?
So, Colorado. Boy.
Well, it's tough. This is why it's tough to speculate. The draft doesn't impact
but it's
this
so
stuff.
much fun.
It is. Don't get me wrong. I want to keep doing it. But free agency and just all that sort of chaos that will come about in early July with free agency really kind of sets the tone. Because, Colorado, who doesn't want to add Jason Spezza? All these teams would like to add him, but who's Colorado losing?
Well, here's my speculation. The draft is in a couple of weeks. Well, it's less than a couple of weeks. I think because this draft isn't like super, super deep and the meat of it's going to be rounds 3 to 5, is that we're going to see some trades draft day.
I always love the draft day trade.
We're going to see some movement draft day. I really believe that.
Do we get a good Vancouver panic trade where they're like, we'll give you Corey Schneider for a pick?
And then come 7-1, it's just going to be a frenzy. Because remember last year wasn't.
Yeah.
Last year was kind of like, I remember painting the kitchen. I was watching it while I was painting the kitchen.
But Daniel Alfredson moved, and that...
Yeah, and I painted something I didn't tape off. The paint brushes went...
It's all the Detroit Red Wings' fault right there.
So, but I think this offseason, because the draft isn't as deep as people would expect it to be, you're going to see a flurry come free agency.
Hopefully not Marc-Andre. So my thought is when that first trade happens, because we're hearing all of these GMs, not all of them, but a lot of them have said this is going to be a crazy trading market. Trading, not free agency, trades. I think when that first big trade happens, and you're right, it'll probably be on draft day if it's going to happen. It's just a row of dominoes. I think we could actually see a lot of trades.
Because what's going to happen is guys are going to trade for an upper pick and get some of those middle picks that we're talking about.
When there's so many teams that, we didn't even get into San Jose. They're not sure if they want to keep Thornton or Marleau or if they're rebuilding. Toronto always wants everybody. Vancouver is just kind of floating around. They're used to having a lot of talent. St. Louis and Anaheim have put their names in pretty much everybody's hat, and that's 4 of the teams. There's 30. And I would say 15 to 20 of them legitimately looking at picking up big players for next year.
Bring on the draft.
Do it. That is it for episode 44. Join us next week as we look at the winners and losers of the 2014 draft.
And we will also have the winners and the losers of the NHL Award Show, which Luke will be attending.
Plus, we'll begin bracing ourselves for the impending free agent frenzy. Thanks for listening to the Hockey Podcast.
Wow, alliteration.